Hi, I'm going to start a series of thoughts that are for my grandchildren. I have one grandchild right now, and I have one on the way in May, and God knows if there are more. And I want them to know some things. And I thought I could just keep it private and tell them. I could write it and tell them. But I decided, or God prompted, that I share and let you listen in. That there might be some gems and kernels of wisdom that He wants all of us to hear. That He also wants His children, my grandchildren, your children, my children, all of us who are children of God. So today starts day one. I don't know. I'm going to probably do this a couple times a month for 2022 and just collect some thoughts for my grandkids. And today I want my grandkids to know that they need to tell someone. They need to speak what's in their heart, what's on their mind, what's gnawing at them, what's causing them fear, what's irritating them, keeping them up at night, making them worry, be afraid, or angry. You see, when we tell someone, healing begins. We have to reveal it to heal it. And I use my dad, which would be great grandpa Paul, whose birthday is today. And I thought the Lord was just nudging me to start. And my sister Monica sent me a copy of a letter I had written to my dad in 1993. I was 31 years old, first finding out about things of my dad that I'd never heard before. He had never told anyone publicly out loud, at least none of us children, nobody that didn't know his story beforehand knew it now. Until my brother-in-law, Pat Lynch, nudged him, suggested kindly and probably pretty persistently that my dad write about his childhood. And eventually, my dad did. And eventually, we read it. And healing began. Your great-grandpa Paul was 10 years old. And his life was one of hardship, poor. His mama had just had her 6th child, so there were 6 hungry mouths to feed. Her husband, your great-great-grandpa Frank, would walk to work on the rails. He'd leave on a Sunday night. He'd return on a Saturday. He'd be around for about 24 hours, bring enough money to get by, and do that again and again. And then one day in April of the year that my dad was 10, his dad died. And his grandma, his mother, my granny, your great-granny Lily, broke. Reading my dad's words, you could see that my granny had suffered mental illness, depression, fear. She was alone to raise 6 children, mostly alone. And they didn't own their house, they rented. And when Grandpa died unexpectedly, when her husband died at the age of 44, he left her with 6 children, one who was just 16 days old. And he's describing his story and how it wasn't really a childhood. They didn't get Christmas presents. They maybe got an orange or an apple or a bag of peanuts, maybe. And that was before Grandpa died. So when his father died, his mother broke, and the children were taken from her out of welfare, out of goodness for the sake of everyone. But if you can imagine a 12-year-old boy at this time, a couple years, trying to reconcile that. I lost my dad, who I hardly knew, and I lost my mom and all my siblings. I can't. I wrote to my dad and said, I can't fathom. I cannot put myself in his shoes, nor can I put myself in Granny's shoes. And imagine that I'd keep my faith. But they kept their faith. And they were, some put in orphanage. My dad and his older brother were not eligible for an orphanage because they were 12 and 14, and they were put into Boys Town and then put into foster care as we know it today. It was about a year after this had happened that they finally got to be together. And he wrote on a dime store tablet and a pencil as if he was 12 years old again. And he said, I finally got to see my mom and my brothers and my sister, and we spent the day crying. My dad never told us that. I never knew at all the struggles. And that his foster dad was not well and tried to beat him. And he says tried to kill him. And he said the farmer's wife saved him from that. And he got out of there as soon as he could. But he wasn't raised by parents really from the age of 10 on. And so I thought, boy, if I had known that, if I had known my dad's story, I might have been more compassionate, or I don't know. But the thing is when my dad finally said something, he began to change and soften and heal. And then the horror of that memory was like still there as a scar, but not as a pain. And I shared in my letter to my dad how I can't imagine, and I'm not going to try to make sense of it, but there's no way I'd be here today. Meaning, I wouldn't be, thus you wouldn't be, if it hadn't been for this. Now, God could have used many things, but God used this for good, and that's my other lesson for you today, is to tell someone because it begins to heal you, even if you never want to speak it or have it see the light of day. And also that God promises that he will turn it to good for all those who love him. And my dad had faith, and my granny had great faith, and God used it for much good. My dad ended up getting out of the foster care, getting into jobs, and eventually took the combines and combined from Iowa, which is where they were, to Minnesota. And he found that he had relatives in St. Bonifacius, Minnesota. And so he sought them out. And then he met my mom, your great-grandma Angie. And they fell in love. And I'm here today because they had me and that they met and fell in love. And had he stayed in Iowa, I don't think they'd ever have met. And the telling had a ripple effect. And his brothers began to write their story, which also added perspective. They didn't see it all the same way. And so hearing what my uncle saw and thought and felt helped me see that we all have a perspective, but we don't always have the fullness. And my Uncle George said in his letter, I don't think we would have turned out well had we stayed where we were, because we were getting into trouble. And we would have been juvenile delinquents had it continued. Hard to say, but when I think about that, I think God spared a lot of heartache and a lot of trouble with the law, or I don't know, their lives actually. And the miracle of it is they never stopped being able to be in contact. And as adults, they lived close by or visited often. And I know my cousins well because we always got together. But all the time getting together, I never knew their story. Never knew. Because I saw laughter, and I saw love, and I saw joy, and I saw thanksgiving, and I saw great faith. But when I heard the story and read the stories, I wondered, how did they keep the faith? But they did. And I just want to say to you, keep the faith. And if you don't have faith, seek it. Just ask the Lord. Ask if he's real. Find out. Search the scriptures. Do your own homework. Don't rely on other people's opinions or thoughts or your Nana Linda's opinion, but figure it out. But know that you come from a long line of rich faith in hard times, impossible times, and that when you tell your hardship, you begin to heal. It doesn't have to be publicly, and it doesn't have to be to the world. It can just be to one trusted person. But talking about it is essential. And knowing and believing that God uses it all for good changes everything. And your life is so precious to me. And I thank my dad and my granny Lily and my grandpa and my dad's siblings, my uncles and my aunt, that they kept the faith because of the joy we have today. Love you, little ones. From Nana.